I'll hand over to you, Ian, if you're happy enough to do your own introduction.
Sure, thank you, Fiona.
And share screen.
I think most of you, well, many of you anyway, know me already, but for those that don't, I'm Ian Speller. I'm an associate professor in the Department of History, and for the purposes of this presentation, I'm also the general editor of the Journal of Military History and Defence Studies, which is why I'm here to talk. And I have a short presentation which I'll run through in a moment, mostly just to keep me on track because we've only got a short amount of time. Hopefully then there'll be room at the end to ask a few questions. Okay, Graham, we'll press on. So just going to talk very quickly about setting up the journal that you see on screen there. And please do take the link and go and have a look at it, you know, as soon as we finish here, because the more people that engage, the better it is. And the journal was set up, we launched, I think, in early February this year, and was a process that I did with a team from the library over a period of months. So just to explain what we did and why we did it, and maybe some lessons from that. So, simple structure: what, why, where, when, and how. Just as a sort of guide to anybody that might be thinking about doing this for themselves. In terms of the what, it's simple enough. It's an online academic journal, open access, and the reason for open access is obvious enough. It's to enhance accessibility and to do so without a paywall. Within this field, there are lots and lots of journals, the field of military history and defence studies. There are no shortage of journals that provide an outlet for scholarly work, but a very large number of them have a paywall so that you can get open access after maybe 6 months or a year. But if you want the work to be available immediately, then often the author has to pay a significant sum to support that. And our journal doesn't require that. It's open access immediately and freely available all the time to everybody. The aim being to publish original work in the field of military history and defence studies. And in particular, to publish work by new researchers, which, and that would include some of the best MA theses that are produced in Maynooth and elsewhere. Because one of the things that struck us, we have a very successful MA programme here at Maynooth, both an MA programme run by the history department, but also one that we work in conjunction with the Defence Forces. And on both programmes, we get some really excellent research done each year. And it always struck us as peculiar that we would get these first-class theses, and very often by people that weren't going to go on for a career in academia. Military personnel carry on in their military career, others go off and do whatever it is they do next. And this really outstanding research would just sit on a shelf in my office or in a storeroom somewhere, and nobody would ever get to see it. So we thought we would create an opportunity for people to get that work out there and get it read by people, because it does no good if it's just sitting on a shelf. And also mindful that new researchers sometimes struggle to find an outlet for their research. So it's not just our own MA students. We'll take anything of appropriate standard by new researchers. Plan also is to run special editions, so based on conference work, or if there's a particular topic that is very interesting. So next year we're planning to do a special edition that looks at the process of military education, and we can get a team of authors together, and all, you know, some of them very experienced academics, and we can produce hopefully an edition that will be of real interest to those interested in military education. Peer reviewed, and the aim is that the journal will have all the normal academic conventions just in an online format, and that makes everything harder, because the peer review process is difficult, and it can be difficult to find the reviewers that you need, and reviewers can take a long time, so you have to encourage them to give you the stuff back in time to get, you know, peer review makes everything harder. But it struck us as really important. There are a lot of non-peer review sites out there producing work in military history, and some of what they publish is really good, and some of what they publish really isn't that good. And what we wanted was a site where, you know, there's a recognizable standard in everything that we publish. So we kept the peer review. And also we wanted a site that we could post announcements in. We used to have a Facebook site that would post announcements in military history for the department, and then my children informed me that nobody under the age of 30 ever looks at Facebook. So we're just looking for somewhere where we could put up information in the fields of military history and defence studies that would showcase things that we do, but also alert researchers in the field to other activities that might be interesting. So just as a for example, we post up information relating to our own MA in military history and strategic studies. We were planning to be quite active in terms of posting this year, but then of course COVID happened, and there's just less going on than normally would be the case. So we haven't been as active in terms of posting stuff as we would have liked, but I think when the world wakes up again, hopefully in the near future, we can use that to the full as its potential. So why do it? Well, partly it was a lack of alternative outlets. There's plenty of journals in defence studies and military history, but there are few of those based in Ireland, few that provide an outlet for Irish work, few of them that are peer-reviewed and open access, and few that will be available to the kind of new researchers that we're particularly interested in. So the aim is to make accessible work that would otherwise be lost, and also to promote discussion and debate about subjects that ought to be discussed and debated, so that anything that encourages people to engage in this field is a useful thing. Of course, the activity also supports a Maynooth University imperative in terms of open access publishing, and the bottom line is we just want to create an interesting and a useful journal, and if we manage to do that, then that's a good enough reason on its own. So why not do it? Well, the truth is there are serious why nots. It's not an unproblematic proposition to put a journal together. The most obvious one would be cost, in terms of what are the financial costs of actually launching this. And of course, if you're doing it through an online platform, the costs are much, much smaller than they would be doing it through print. So cost isn't a particularly significant barrier for us, particularly once we have support from the library, which we've had. The biggest cost is in terms of time, and the time that it takes all of those people involved, and particularly, I suppose, my own time from an editorial standpoint. It's enormously time consuming, and you need a good team around you, otherwise you've no hope of keeping on top of it. Which brings me to the point, the next point about support. None of this would have been possible without the very active support of the team from the library. So Fiona and Ranju and Suzanne were fundamental to the success of making all this work. I am a Luddite in terms of technology. I absolutely would have no capacity to do anything on any of the technical stuff required to get an online journal to work. So the support that we got from working with that library team was critical to success. Interest is key. Why do it? There's no point doing it if people aren't going to be interested in this field. So the hope was we would create something that people would read, which is a point that I'll come back to. And also value added. There's no point producing a journal that just unleashes mountains of rubbish onto an unwilling public. So could we get sufficient work of sufficient quality that would add something to discussion and debate in this field? And from the beginning, we were very confident that we could, because our students are producing it on a very regular basis. So we kind of knew we would be able to add value if we could get this thing up and running, and if we could do it right. Where we did it eventually was to use the open journal system and publishing through the Maynooth Academic Publishing. We discussed this over a period of time, really looking at alternative platforms, and eventually went with the open journal system because it's so simple, so easy to use. The platform already exists. Even a technophobe like myself can go in there and structure and create a journal that does all the things you need a journal to do. So the where was actually, kind of simple once we thought about it. But the site is really good. It's got what you need in terms of low cost, it's highly accessible, and it's really easy to use. So it's intuitive. So that worked out pretty well. When? Well, why not now? Spent years talking about, myself, my colleague David Murphy and others spent years talking about setting up a journal like this. And there were always reasons not to. We were always too busy, or it was too difficult, or there were too many barriers in the way. And the truth of the matter is, you've pretty much just got to grasp the nettle and go for it. So yeah, seize the day, go for it, just do it. And of course, the second week we did it, then COVID hit, and that has had an impact on what followed, because everybody involved in the process is suddenly much busier than they'd expect it to be, and that's impacted on our bringing out the second edition, which has just been delayed because all the authors, all the reviewers, and the editor have just been up to their eyes in other stuff. But you know, stuff happens. There's always an excuse for not starting. Why not just do it? And the how? Well, the critical point initially was, I suppose, the same for an old-fashioned paper journal. You make sure you've got appropriate content. Once we were sure that not only we had appropriate content for the first edition, but that there would be a steady stream of appropriate content, that was really it. There was no reason not to proceed. Identify an editorial team so that there's a useful range of people that can support the really difficult work that is involved in terms of going through the bulk of papers and editing them and going back to authors and getting all the stuff done. And you've got appropriate peer reviewers, and you know, that can be difficult. People don't particularly want 15,000 word journal articles or 10,000 word journal articles landing in their inbox with a request for a review. So you need quite a wide range of people, but you know, that's obvious enough, I suppose. We found an appropriate platform. We figured out how the platform works, which I suspect involved everybody in the library knowing how the platform worked and me taking months to get used to it. But we played around with a draft site. I got to, you know, work it all out at my own time, and now I have a reasonable grip about it. It is really quite intuitive. It was critical that we made sure the nice people in the library were on site, because they did all the serious work, all the really hard work, and covered issues like that I would have forgotten about. Sorting out copyright, making sure that intellectual property was protected, making sure that all the articles have digital identifiers, making sure that the system works and is updated and is in accordance with GDPR, and all those other really important things. This is absolutely is not a project that's just being run by the history department. We couldn't do it without the support that we're getting through Maynooth Academic Publishing. And when you've got all that, you just go and do it. So we did it. We put this thing together. We created a first edition. We published it in, we launched it, I think, in early February. It went live at the same time, late January, early February. What happened next was I think I got deluged in a whole load of work, because it's a lot of work to get a first edition of a journal out. And when you're doing it for the first time, there are all sorts of things you didn't think about. And I think almost all of those things would have been harder if we weren't using an online platform. But actually, the fact that we use an online platform made it all substantially easier. So I'm very grateful for that, that it was much easier than it might have been. And I'm expecting it to get easier for next time. But actually, now we've done it once, that I'll be ready for some of those pitfalls. The first edition is up there, and if you want to know how we got on, then go and have a look at the edition. It is, I'd like to think, a collection of really interesting pieces of work, and they're readily available to be viewed by a wide audience. And the site, I think, is a really easy site for the user to work their way around. And I noticed one of our authors is part of this meeting, and Jim, I think you're in the meeting, Jim. That's Jim Deary's article on the contribution of the Irish soldiers to the British Army during the Peninsula Campaign. And I flagged it up there just to show, that's the top of the screen and the bottom of the screen, important things that you can view it online, you can view the abstracts online, you can download the PDF. It's got the digital identifier at the front, which protects the author's ownership. The bottom of the screen, we have the copyright information in terms of the Creative Commons and information relating to Maynooth Academic Publishing. So everything you need to be there is right there in front of you. For people like myself that are a bit old-fashioned, you can, if you really want to, download the entire edition as a PDF and print it out, but it comes to hundreds of pages, so not even I'm willing to do that, and I really am a Luddite, but it's there in a sort of an old-fashioned way if people prefer to use it that way. And in terms of did anybody actually look at this stuff, one of the great things about the online journal is it gives you all the metrics. It tells you who's been viewing what and when. So just this morning I downloaded article views across the first edition over the last 3 months, and you can see there it hops up and down. So 12 people viewed it one day, maybe half a dozen the next day, and so on and so forth. We of course got the biggest hit right at the start when we set this thing up, and somewhere I wrote down the overall figures just so that I have them handy. Yeah, here we go. So in the time since January when we went live, we got a big spike in January. The leading article had 1,500 hits and 900 article downloads. The remainder got in the region of about 200 and 250 article downloads. That I think is pretty good for a journal in its first edition. 900 article downloads I think is probably in excess of what you would get if you'd published in one of the top brand expensive, you know, peer-reviewed journals. I'm not absolutely convinced 900 people are reading each edition of those. So we are reaching, in the first edition, we're reaching a reasonably wide audience, and hopefully as we get more editions published in future, the site will get better known and we'll get more and more views. So for my mind, I'm counting that as a success. So what they said at the start appears to be true. If you build it, they'll come. That's true in terms of views. It's also true in terms of article submissions, that we are overflowing with, and overflowing is maybe exaggeration, we have plenty of potential submissions for the next edition and the edition after. One of the problems we've had is in terms of getting it all finished off at a time when everybody is just so busy with other things. But a second edition was due out in October, and now it looks like we'll have to push it back to December. But again, one of the advantages of the online environment is it's not the end of the world if we have to just push it back a little bit. It doesn't change too much. Okay. So I'm going to finish talking now, and hopefully we can have some questions and a bit of a discussion. But before I go, please do take note of the website and have a look at the journal, or just Google Journal of Military and Defence Studies and it'll take you there.